Hello, Ellen.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine.
I'm looking forward to tonight.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Just a sec. Yes, so it actually starts at 6:30, just to give you a
At 6:30? Okay.
but that's okay. We had a little confusion about that, so I decided to log on early because I was concerned that folks might show up early and then be confused. So,
Well, I can get off until 6:30.
oh no, stay right there. You're perfectly fine. Let me just comb my hair and I'll be right back.
Okay.
There, I don't look quite the fright. So how are you doing, Ellen?
I'm doing okay. I
Good.
am.
Good.
I'm looking forward to church.
Yes.
And
I know.
I'm looking forward. I bought my book at the bookstore.
Oh, yes. Open it up. I want to see inside of it. Yes.
It's a graphic novel.
It's a graphic history is what it is, you know.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you, Doonesbury, and all those other people that sort of, piloted this.
Right.
And now they're all mainstream, it's what kids read. They read these graphic novels.
Right. Well, it's just amazing.
And this Dunn family was associated with Central.
Oh, the Dunn family who played the piano.
Yes, I had heard that name, but I hadn't made the connection. And then Wilson mentioned it. So I don't know if there'll be anybody on the call tonight that can elucidate that. I don't expect that Nick Weldon will be tuned into that necessarily.
Right.
But so we have a personal connection with the Dunns. Isn't that something?
That's something, that is. So tell me again what the connection is.
Well, the Dunn family was part of Central Church. They must have been his progeny, and I think you talked about the piano player. I think you're right. It was the Dunns were involved in music.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously the lieutenant governor, he was earlier than Central, because he was what, 1848 or something like that? 1860 something.
I'm not sure.
We'll find out. Now, whether he was ever part of Central, I do not know.
Oh, that's right. It says Oscar Dunn, Forgotten Hero.
Right.
And Oscar Dunn, a Lieutenant Governor of Louisiana between 1868
Right.
and 1875.
It was during Reconstruction, before Jim Crow, right?
Yes, and interestingly, it says lithography by Currier and Ives.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that something?
Wow, that is something.
Yeah.
That is something. Yeah.
And that's going to be interesting to.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, this graphic novel is marvelous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Dunn became the first Black public official ever to visit the White House, and here's a picture.
Is that right? Wow. Yes. So, and how's your family?
They're doing well. Camille's oldest, Sophia, wants very much to go to Oberlin. She got a scholarship, but they're going to have to figure out the finances.
It's very expensive.
Very expensive.
Is that right? How much, do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I remember telling my father that I wanted to go to Oberlin, and he said, well, give me one good reason why you shouldn't go to Elmhurst. And I couldn't come up with anything. And my parents couldn't have afforded it either. So, you know, but she's really anxious to go. So I don't know.
Is that right?
Yes, she just.
Well, it's a free-spirited place.
It is. So it would be quite a treat for her, I think.
Yes. Probably the name Dave Chappelle doesn't mean anything to you, does it?
Well, tell me about that.
Well, Dave Chappelle is an African-American comedian.
Yes.
Okay. And he used to have the Chappelle Show.
Right.
And I mean, he is, his language is beyond atrocious, you know, so every other word is a swear word. And he has this persona. I personally think he's really amazing because he says a lot of things that are true, but he says them in provocative and humorous ways. And so at first, for many years, I was put off by him, didn't want to have anything to do with him at all. But I've sort of come around in my old age. But David Letterman has this show that he does on Netflix.
Oh.
And he's not, you know, he's no longer on the Tonight Show and he's off TV. But the show that he does is he interviews different people. And so I saw David Letterman's interview of Dave Chappelle. And so you see him, you get to meet him as a human being, not as this, you know, potty mouth comedian. And he lives in Oberlin, Ohio.
Oh.
And he's this Black man, and he lives in Oberlin, Ohio. Let me tell you, there aren't many Black people in Oberlin, Ohio. And he's an intellect. I mean, and he, you know, it was just so interesting to see this other side of him. And he talked about Oberlin and the professors there, and you know, it just was, it was so out of context in my mind, but it was very revealing. So anyway.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, you'll see.
you have to save a chunk of money
Yeah. Wow.
for college. Oh, wow.
I
Well,
know.
I told my children, I said, well, you have to get in the P-Cool bank and take out what you need, but there are 4 children who are going to college. So that's going to be
Right.
split 4 ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's hard to figure out. My kids went to St. John's College in Annapolis, which is the
Oh,
great book school.
yes.
And so they study the great books of Western philosophy. And so it's pure humanities. And of course, humanities are on the outs these days. Everything's technology. Classes are, you're assigned readings. You're in a class of 12 people. You come, you sit around a table. The professor gives a question to kick off the conversation, and it's Socratic learning, and it's collegial learning, and you participate in the conversation. It was at the time, I thought it was very expensive. It was $40-some thousand a year, like $45,000 a year,
Wow.
But of course, by today's standards, that's not too bad. I'm not up on those numbers, but $70,000 a year, $80,000 a year to go to college. Isn't that unbelievable?
It's unbelievable. It is.
I mean, so many people don't even earn that amount of money.
No, and I think that what Camille's worried about is what's going to be left at the end when she graduates. How much is she going to have to?
I know that, and that is the other thing is, these kids and their parents too, they kind of get snuckered into taking out all these loans. Here, you can get this loan, you can get that loan, you can get this loan. And then in the end, they're mortgaged to the hilt for the majority of their adult life. And
Right.
They don't realize or understand what they're doing. My kids came out of college with about $20,000 in debt, which was not bad, at all. But then my son went to George Washington School of Law, and he was on his own for that. We didn't help him with law school, so he just took out all the loans. And, so he ended up $150,000 in debt. So that's something.
That's something.
Yeah. How much college debt do you have, Nick? Don't tell us. You don't have to.
A lot.
A lot. Yes.
Enough.
Ellen and I were just talking because her granddaughter wants to go to Oberlin. And and it's very expensive. She doesn't know how much, but it's very expensive. And I was saying, when my kids went to school, they went to a private school, St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. It was like $45,000 a year, and that was a lot of money. But now it can be 70 or 80, So.
Oh man, yeah, it is quite a burden. We are hopefully crossing our fingers. Dawn is on the she's worked at nonprofits for 10 years. So they have I forget the name of the program, but if you work in nonprofit for 10 years or related, firefighter, police, teacher, they'll do the loan forgiveness, public service loan forgiveness. That's what it is. So she's on that track. So but yeah, it is, man, 70. It was a lot back when we were in school, and that wasn't too long ago, but it's increased even more.
I know. Where did you go to school?
I went to Northwestern University.
Yeah.
I did undergraduate.
That's no cheap school.
No.
That's no cheap school.
No, it's definitely not. I was lucky. I got a good bit of grant money. And then Dawn went to undergrad at University of Michigan and grad school at University of Chicago, which was also not cheap. So, and that's where we met, was when we were in Chicago. So, yeah. But I appreciate you all having me on for this group. I don't know
Yeah.
how these sessions usually go. Oh, awesome. I'm glad you have the book. You know,
I'm ready.
I'm prepared. Great. I'm not sure how many folks will have read it or seen it or what. I'm kind of prepared to go in any number of directions. I've presented a few different times, everywhere from like historians who really know their Reconstruction history to fourth graders. So, you know, it's a cool bit of Louisiana history, and so I'm excited to be able to share a bit about the
Yeah.
book, and also, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I get a lot of questions about the process because it's a graphic novel and it's not a traditional history book. So if anybody wants to hear a little bit about how we kind of conceived of it and put it together, I can talk a little bit about that as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
I think it's a long time waiting kind of thing.
Yes.
Really.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just,
We
first of
feel
all,
the same
why
way.
not?
Yeah. So, you know, typically the group is not too large.
Mhm.
It's 6, 8 people at the most.
Okay.
But you know, I'm hoping that we'll have more people, and I think that we will, because as I mentioned to you in the email, there's a connection between Central and the Dunn family, which I hadn't realized. But
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that either.
and so hopefully there'll be somebody on the call tonight who can elucidate us on that a little bit.
Yeah,
Sure.
here's an illustration of Dunn with his family
Mhm,
after a flood.
mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So so that sparks a little additional interest, I hope. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. So listen, I made it so multiple people can share their screens. You want to test it out that we can share? You can share your screen.
Sure. Let's test it out. And
Nick Weldon has
double click.
started screen sharing. Okay, there we go.
Okay. So you can see the presentation screen.
Yeah, right.
Okay, great.
That's great. Okay.
Okay.
So you probably want
Uh,
to stop sharing for the moment, but at least we
Sure.
know we've got that set up to go.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This is terrific. This is
Yeah.
terrific.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. You know, I mean, we're all just so tired of this, as you well know.
Yeah.
Um, and so, as you know, we're back in person in terms of church, but you know,
Yeah.
we're still practicing social distancing, and that's a little, you know, a little shaky for some folks. And so, we're encouraging people to not come if they have any concerns. And after our first
Mhm.
Sunday back, you know, some people were concerned because people were singing, even though they were masked,
Mhm.
they were singing. And they're not supposed to sing.
Yeah.
So last
Right.
Sunday, we kind of gave the message, you know, don't sing, and
Mhm.
and that's a legitimate concern. So
You
Yeah.
can always hum.
that's right. You can hum in your heart, you know,
That's
don't
right.
close your mouth along. So
That's right.
um,
Definitely a
anyway,
learning curve.
yeah. And
Well,
how are
we hope
yeah, go ahead.
we're doing great. Yeah, we hope to, you know, rejoin, you know, we're kind of in this awkward place, as I think all parents are, where, you know, until Dawn and I are both vaccinated now. Well, I'm 8 days into my second shot. So, you know, we're kind of just feeling things through like a lot of people are with kids, and, you know, what do you do? Kids can't get vaccinated. So we're kind of getting more and more comfortable, I guess, with, you know, especially because things here are looking very good in New Orleans Parish. But anyway, in general, we're doing really well. Dawn is pushing to get to the end of the school year, which is always a crazy time for her as a school social worker. And
Mhm.
I have just gotten through kind of the initial push with this book launch, and have other projects kind of lined up down the line. But I'm kind of getting a little bit of gasp of relief right now, which is really nice. And the kids are doing really well. Xavier's in pre-K and almost getting to the end of his first year, and, you know, we're all doing really well.
Good, good. That's great. That's great. Yeah.
Well, do you have anything in your head for the next graphic novel?
Yes. I don't know how much I can talk about it right now because it was kind of a interesting situation where I had kind of been doing research on a topic related to the timber history in Louisiana for about a year. And then I encountered somebody who was not only researching the same thing, but had been doing so for about 10 years and wanted to make a graphic novel. So that kind of, in one sense, killed my book that I was working on. But on another, it sounds like I'm hoping that we can actually work together and make this thing together. So that's where it's kind of where we are right now. So it could end up working out really well. So still a lot in flux, but I do want to, I haven't always done graphic novels. I've edited all kinds of other materials at the museum. But we do want to kind of sustain the momentum from Monumental and make more of these because it has, we have gotten a really good reception for it. So hopefully the first of many.
Graphic novels are the thing of the day, aren't they?
Yeah, increasingly so with history books and nonfiction materials. There's a lot of really cool examples in the last several years of just kind of a different way to teach history, especially, there's a lot of, we're doing a program right now where people can donate to help us get the book in the high school classrooms, because that's, there's a lot of appeal there with kind of younger readers learning complicated history. So yeah, it's there's a lot of interest in it right now. Hello.
So we have Evelyn from New York.
Hi, Nick.
Hi, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
So is it snowing up there, Evelyn?
No, it's gorgeous. Finally spring, even little leaves, teeny ones, but they're coming.
All right, great. Hi, Lori.
Hello, everyone.
You're still
Hi,
in New
Nick.
Orleans, right? You're still in New Orleans, right, Lori?
I am. My departure was
Yeah.
delayed a day due to the wind ripping the awning off my RV when my daughter borrowed it.
Oh, no.
No.
Yeah, so she had to wait until Monday to find an RV tech to remove it so she could drive the RV back. But everything's fine. It's just an awning. There are worse things in the world, like a pandemic. So.
Hey, Melanie. Hi, Melanie. I see you're still connecting. Hi, Melanie.
Hello, good evening.
Hey, Melanie, we've got a picture of you today.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
I
Is
love
that-
it.
That's a statue on one of the big buildings on one of the mansions on St. Charles Avenue. I really like that statue.
Aha. So say hi to Nick.
Hi, Nick.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. I can't wait to hear what you have to tell us.
Yeah. Melanie's screen is usually blank.
Black.
Yeah, just black. So it's delightful to have this statue, Melanie. It makes me think of you.
I like the
you.
statue. It brightens up the screen.
Yeah.
Hey, Curry.
Hello. Hey, Nick.
Hey, how you doing?
I don't think Nettie's going to be with us this evening, and she sends her regards, Nick. She wants you to know that she's purchased your book, she's reading it, and she's sorry that she couldn't make it tonight.
Oh, that's great though. That's no problem at all.
Hey, Lorna.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Everybody's coming at the same time.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jim.
Hi. Hi.
I was just thinking of how 25 years ago, we would not be thinking that we would be able to connect with one another with little pictures on a computer screen.
No.
10 years ago.
Or
Yeah.
10,
Mhm.
or that we have computers the size of our palm,
Yeah, right.
when they used to take up huge rooms.
Amazing.
Okay, there's the cat. The cat has to make his entrance.
Every time I'm on Zoom, for all occasions,
Yes, that's right.
church, work, you name it.
Mhm.
Mm.
Ellen,
Is that
Yeah,
James
so-
Bonds?
Yes, sir. How you doing?
Shaking
Hey
the
there,
board?
Jim.
hey, Jim.
Hey, Ella. Boy,
Great to
look who we
see you.
got there. My goodness.
All your fans, Jim.
Yes, I know. I know. That's what I was getting ready to say. You're all my favorite people.
How you feeling, Jim?
Well, I'm still a little weak, and I have the dizzy spells. But other than that, physically, I think I'm okay. At least I can walk by myself now for a while.
Wonderful.
Uh-huh.
Oh, Kathleen.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Ken.
Melanie, you have to tell us about the sculpture.
Oh, I'm not muted. I thought I was muted. I really don't know anything about it.
Okay.
I took this picture when I was driving around uptown to take photos of all these house floats and Mardi Gras decorations of, staying in place. And so this was one of the big mansions on St. Charles Avenue that has it. And I really like it. It's so cute, this little girl with a sunflower in her hand.
Mhm. How you doing, Curry?
Doing good today. How are you?
That's as good as I could do. All right. Okay. Okay, so Lori, are you going to kick this off here for us tonight?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'll kick it off with a prayer, just to put me on the spot. Dear Lord, thank you very much for gathering us together to listen to Nick tell us about Oscar Dunn, the first Black Lieutenant Governor of Louisiana. Be with us as we open our minds and our hearts to new knowledge. And just be with us. Thank you very much. Sorry. I want to thank Nick. It's just one of those days. I want to thank Nick for being willing to come share this information with us and for helping us to learn about Oscar Dunn and his importance in Louisiana history, and for just being willing to share your knowledge with us so that we can become more rounded individuals. So thank you very much, Nick.
How did you get started? How did you come to find this person and want to write about it?
Yeah, sure. I can. And Lori, thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for coming to meet and chat. It's good to see some familiar faces, and yeah, I'd love to talk to you all about Oscar Dunn, and my entry point here is that I edited a book about Oscar Dunn called Monumental, which I work at the Historic New Orleans Collection, which is a museum and research center and publisher based in the French Quarter. And this story was just kind of a remarkable one. I stumbled upon 5 or so years ago, and I have a little presentation. I don't know if I want to if I should share it now, but or give a little bit more introduction. But it might help to have some visual aids here. So Oscar Dunn, I hope you all can see that. That's the book and the creators there. But Oscar Dunn was, as you said, the first Black lieutenant governor in American history. He was elected lieutenant governor of Louisiana in 1868. So this was during Reconstruction, which followed the Civil War. And he was really a remarkable man. I'll skip ahead here a little bit. These are the folks I worked with. And there's a story here about Brian Mitchell that I want to tell before getting into the story of Oscar Dunn, because I think we can learn a lot through Brian's work here. Brian is the primary author of this book and the primary researcher about Oscar Dunn's life. He is the preeminent scholar of Oscar Dunn. And then Barrington Edwards here is this wonderful illustrator we found and worked with on this book that we made, and he's based in Boston. But to understand Oscar Dunn, you need to know a little bit about my collaborator, Brian. Brian is a native of New Orleans, and he couldn't be with us tonight, but he teaches history at Arkansas Little Rock right now. And he's a descendant of Oscar Dunn's. And he learned about this important person in his family's history when he was about in 2nd grade. He had left New Orleans briefly during his childhood. He moved with his mother to Chicago, but he came back to go to school. And for a time, he lived with his great-grandmother in New Orleans. And she would pull out old photo albums and newspaper clippings and tell him, stories about his family's history. And his great-grandmother's name was Mattie Dunn. And, it turned out that, through his great-grandfather, Emmanuel Dunn, that he was related to Oscar Dunn. But the story here, which is kind of part of the push to us making this book and Brian doing the research that he did, is when he was in 2nd grade here in New Orleans, he was having a classroom discussion with his teacher about governors and lieutenant governors and political leaders from Louisiana's history. And the teacher asked if anybody could name anybody, and he mentioned that Oscar Dunn. He raised his hand, and you can see some pictures from the book here, that he was my ancestor. He was the first Black lieutenant governor in the whole country. And his teacher told him that it wasn't true, that there had never been any Black governors or lieutenant governors in Louisiana. And he was in 2nd grade, and he was embarrassed, and he ran home after school to his great-grandmother's house and told her what had happened. And, is this true? Why would my teacher say this to me? And she just, told him that people had forgotten. And there's a lot of reasons why that had been. Oscar Dunn passed away in 1871 while he was in office, and I'll tell you all a little bit about that. But it had been about 100 years since he had passed that Brian had this experience. It was in the 1970s, and 100 years had passed, and to the point that a teacher in Louisiana teaching political history didn't know that Oscar Dunn existed. And so growing up, Brian had a fascination with history and genealogy, and he ended up getting his PhD in urban history at the University of New Orleans. And he wrote his dissertation about Oscar Dunn so that people would not forget anymore about who he was. And not only did he write his dissertation, but he uncovered a lot of primary sources and research that nobody in 150 years had ever found, and some incredible stuff about Oscar Dunn's life. And so he publishes this dissertation in 2011, and he goes on to become a professor of history and teaches from it here and there. But it had kind of been sitting, and I work at a history museum, and I'm a writer and an editor, and I've been researching story topics, and I was studying the era of Reconstruction here, which is fascinating for all of the achievements that happened in a very short time span, only to be quashed shortly thereafter. And I found Brian Mitchell's research on Oscar Dunn, and I was just captivated with this story. And long story short, Brian and I got together, and we did a podcast together. We did a whole lot of things, and we decided to make this book, and Brian had always wanted to make it as a graphic novel. So that's a little bit of the backstory. And just the news update. I don't know if anybody has been following the city council's street renaming commission updates, but Brian and I had been in touch with historians who had been contributing to that effort. And in their final report, which still has to pass the city council, the commission has recommended Oscar Dunn's name take the place of Washington Artillery Park, which overlooks Jackson Square. Washington Artillery Park is named for a Confederate military group. And so Oscar Dunn may yet have his day in the sun.
Wonderful.
But I want to, and so we're waiting eagerly to hear more from City Council about that. But a lot of our research informed that decision, so we were elated to hear about that. But this is Oscar Dunn, and this is a photo that we believe was taken in Washington, D.C. in around 1869 when he visited President Ulysses S. Grant. Oscar Dunn was the first Black elected official to ever visit the White House. And it was actually kind of controversial at the time that Ulysses S. Grant took this private meeting with him. But there was a lot of reason for that. Oscar Dunn was a pretty significant individual. So this is kind of his backstory. We know he was born in about 1822 and that his mother was enslaved. Her name was Maria. We don't know who his father was. We know that his stepfather, James Dunn, who was a free man of color working in the city, emancipated him along with his mother and his sister in 1831. And I just skip ahead here. These are the documents that we found that confirms this. And these were details about about Oscar Dunn's life that before Brian started digging around in the archives, the image on the left was James Dunn purchasing Oscar, his sister, and his mother. And then to the right is the about a year later, because there was a process that had to take place, James Dunn emancipating his family. So this had been sitting in the city archives, the notarial archives, for who knows how long until Brian found it. And it's an important aspect of Oscar Dunn's life. As a young child, he was involved in plastering. That was his first job. He had a bit of an education, but at the time, kids didn't stay in school long. So about the age of 13 or 14, we think he got into plastering. He also loved music, and he was apparently a very good guitar player, and ended up actually taking on some of his own pupils. He joined the Princeton Freemasons, and that kind of got him into a lot of civic engagement and working with other prominent Black people, free Black people in the city. And he was a member of the St. James AME Church. I'm really interested to see the Dunn family connection to St. Matthew or to Central. But I do know that Oscar Dunn attended St. James AME, which is still there over on Roman. And so during the Civil War, Oscar Dunn started to get involved with the political activism that was taking place in the city. And we think this is through his Freemasonry contacts. And what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of the suffrage movement was birthed here in New Orleans from the class of free African Americans living in the city who starting to petition leadership and petitioning Abraham Lincoln to emancipate the enslaved people. And so he was in that group of folks who were writing letters to Lincoln and sending delegates to meet him in DC. And during the Civil War, that was kind of his first foray into the political realm. After the war, Oscar Dunn opened it was called an intelligence bureau, but basically it was an agency that he took in. There were all these freedmen now who needed work, freedmen and women. And so he helped find them work. The collapse of the slave economy also meant that there were all of these plantations that needed workers. And so Oscar Dunn found fair, equitable work for these freed people. He often got them wages above minimum wage. And there's a lot of interesting articles you could find in the New Orleans Tribune, which was the first Black newspaper in the country, where they talk about Dunn's reputation as a negotiator on behalf of freedmen finding work. So he built this reputation of being a fighter for them. And so he got involved in a lot of organizations. He advocated for Black orphans. He started this collective called the People's Bakery, which was a kind of economic empowerment movement that was based on the idea of having a bakery, and freed people could buy into the co-op and share the spoils of the endeavor. And so a lot of things happened that I'm kind of skipping over. There was a big event that took place in 1866 that changed the course of American history, which was the Mechanics Institute riot. This took place at a political meeting hall in New Orleans, where freed people and their white allies were meeting to discuss suffrage. And basically, the mayor of the city at the time was a former Confederate, and he called on the police and other thugs that were aligned with his cause to attack this meeting. And a number of people were killed in this attack. And that, plus another event of racial violence in Memphis, spurred the US government to institute radical Reconstruction and send military generals into the South to take control of the government and appoint new leaders. As a result of this, in 1867, Oscar Dunn is appointed to the city council. There were, I believe, 3 Black men who were appointed. At that time, it was called like the Council of Aldermen, but it's the same function. And while he was on the city council, a very important thing that he did was he initiated the first bill for public schools in the state, and it was a bill that would be for integrated public schools, which is a radical notion at the time. It failed on the council, but the language of Oscar Dunn's proposal in 1867 for integrated public schools was later folded into the new state constitution of 1868. And in that same year, of course, he was elected lieutenant governor of Louisiana with a man named Henry Clay Warmoth. I'll skip ahead here. This man here on the left is Warmoth. This was the governor of Louisiana at the kind of dawn of Reconstruction. He was not from here. He was from Southern Illinois. He had served in the Civil War. He was 25 years old, and they actually had to change the laws of the state to allow a man that young to become governor. And Oscar Dunn was about 20 years his senior as his lieutenant governor. And we get into it in the book, but Dunn was a little bit hesitant at first to join the ticket with this guy who was a little bit untested, had a reputation for being a bit unscrupulous, but who did campaign on suffrage and civil rights. And so Dunn and Warmoth are swept into office because part of what happened that year was that the national government permitted Black people to vote in Louisiana for the first time. And so they came out in great numbers to support the Republican ticket at the time. And that was Warmoth and Dunn. And this man to the right here is PBS Pinchbeck, who that name may ring a bell for some folks. He's a new character in this book. He would later succeed Dunn as lieutenant governor and then later serve as acting governor of Louisiana. But he and Dunn were actually rivals, and it's kind of a central part of Dunn's story, and I can get into that a little bit more. But so Oscar Dunn marries. It was actually before he joined the city council, but he was an adoptive father. His wife was a widow, and she had 3 children, and so it strikes Brian and I that Dunn always had a soft spot for children, and this may have played a factor in his advocacy for education and for orphans. And so he had 3 children that he adopted. And later, when a court order forces New Orleans to integrate its public schools in 1871, Oscar Dunn's 3 children were in the first group of kids to integrate schools in New Orleans in January 1871. And a lot of people don't know that it was one of the first it was probably the first large-scale public school integration effort in American history. And as many as several thousand of white and Black children attended school together in the city for several years There was a little bit of pushback at first. Some white parents pulled their kids out of schools, but then a few months later, you can read the old newspapers, were quietly re-enrolling their children into these integrated schools. And about a third of children in the city attended integrated schools together during the 1870s. And it's just kind of a remarkable phase. And Oscar Dunn had so much to do with that. That is also actually where you see a big boom in parochial schools, because parents who did not want their children to attend integrated public schools and enrolled them into some of these parochial schools. So skipping ahead a little bit now, I've kind of talked about some of this. This is more interesting to historians, which is some of the new research that we uncovered, because Oscar Dunn was not an unknown person. And in fact, W.E.B. Du Bois, in his seminal work on Reconstruction that he published in 1935, actually calls out Oscar Dunn. He doesn't talk about him a lot in his book, but he calls him out as being this incorruptible leader and just being this pillar of Black political leadership. And, so he was known, but the early authors of Reconstruction history kind of wrote he and some of the other prominent Black leaders out of the history books or portrayed them as subservient to their white counterparts. And it took really decades, maybe even a century and a half, to kind of recover some of these stories and some of these sources that had been buried or overlooked for a really long time. And, so what happened to Oscar Dunn? Well, while he was in office in 1871, he had a feud with this man, Henry Warmoth, the governor. Warmoth vetoed a civil rights bill in 1869 that would have given Black people in the state a lot of protections. They were facing a lot of harassment on trains, in businesses, public conveyances, and Dunn and some of his radical counterparts in the state legislature, there were a number of Black men who were elected into the legislature in 1868 as well. And civil rights was a major cause for them. So when Warmoth vetoed it, it was kind of this irreconcilable split with Oscar Dunn. So by 1871, the split had been kind of complete. I mentioned Oscar Dunn's meeting with Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was a pretty radical leader for his time, and Dunn was actually kind of an ally of his in Louisiana. Grant and Warmoth, the governor in Louisiana, didn't see eye to eye. They had a history dating to Grant discharging him dishonorably during the Civil War. And so this all comes to a head in 1871 at the Republican State Party convention, where a majority vote Dunn the president of the convention. And Warmoth splits and holds his own separate convention. It's very chaotic. There's another thing that takes place in 1871 where Warmoth injures himself in a boating accident. He gets his foot caught in the gears. It's covered pretty heavily in the local press, and Dunn actually becomes acting governor. This is one of the insights that our book reveals, is that Dunn was actually the first acting governor in U.S. history, a Black acting governor in U.S. history, preceding PBS Pinchback's term by about 18 months. And it was not an insignificant term. There were a couple of months in the summer of 1871 where Dunn was governor of Louisiana, because Warmoth was so injured that he actually left the state. He went to well, we don't know where he went the first time. The second time he left the state to recuperate, he went to Pass Christian in Mississippi, and was basically unheard from, unaccounted for. And so with the governor injured and out of state, Oscar Dunn legally, according to the Constitution, had an obligation to step up as acting governor, and he did. Why that has been lost to the history books, your guess is as good as mine. But anyway, that is an important detail of Dunn's biography. So a few months after all of this happens, Dunn and Warmoth have the split. Dunn's acting governor. Warmoth storms back to the city in a rage on crutches, saying that it had been a usurpation of his power. Oscar Dunn dies mysteriously at about the age of 49. And so suddenly, in fact, that immediately there were rumors that he had been poisoned. Rumors, in fact, that he may have been poisoned by this man here on the right, PBS Pinchback, who is commonly known as the first Black governor. Pinchback was an ally of Warmoth. To kind of come to understand him as PBS Pinchback was a political survivor. and he tended to support wherever, the issues and the people, wherever the winds were blowing. And he was kind of unscrupulous. And Oscar Dunn was the opposite. Even his political rivals, ex-Confederates, people who had no reason to speak highly of him, would often say that Oscar Dunn, despite him being a Black leader and his political stances, was incorruptible, a spotless leader. There was a lot of corruption that took place in Louisiana at the time, but he was above all that. And PBS Pinchback in a lot of ways was the opposite and had room to gain by Dunn's demise. In fact, Warmoth appointed him, or got him basically appointed lieutenant governor after Dunn's death. And then a year later, when Warmoth is impeached and while he's awaiting his trial, Pinchback ascends to acting governor for 34 days. And for that, he's recognized as the first Black governor, but Dunn had actually preceded him. So Dunn dies in November 1871, and there's this outpouring of grief in New Orleans. They have a massive funeral. There's a funeral parade that comes down Canal Street from his church. Actually, his house was next to his church. We don't know what happened to his house over the years, but he lived in a nice home at Canal and Claiborne. And that was where the viewing was. It was around the corner from the church. And the newspaper reports differ, but we can say that at least 20,000 people came out to view Oscar Dunn's funeral. The press said it was the largest funeral in the city's history. And mourners came out and they flocked to Canal Street. At the time, the Henry Clay statue was at the base of Canal Street. And so the parade stretched for a couple of miles all the way down to the base. It turned around and they continued up to St. Louis Cemetery number 2, which is where he was buried and where his tomb is still there today in St. Louis number 2. So it just kind of goes to show how beloved he was at the time. In fact, his wife and children fell on hard times, and a few months later, Frederick Douglass came to New Orleans and gave a famous speech. He had many speeches that he toured around and gave, and he gave this one it was a fundraiser, and the funds raised from Frederick Douglass's speech were donated to Oscar Dunn's widow. So he was a beloved figure, died suddenly. The poisoning rumors lingered, but it was a very violent time to be involved in politics in Louisiana. And in fact, one of Dunn's fiercest defenders and the man who accused PBS Pinchback of playing a role was actually attacked in Pinchback's presence in January of 1872 on New Year's Day, in fact. So a lot of people, even decades later in interviews, say that they had their suspicions, but they were scared to speak up. So we don't know. We don't know what happened. There was a lot of yellow fever, but it came at a conspicuous time during his fallout with the governor, and when he had a lot of momentum. In fact, there were national newspapers that had hypothesized or rumored that Ulysses S. Grant was considering him a vice presidential candidate for 1872, because Grant's vice president at the time pulled out, was not going to run for re-election. And so you can find a few different newspapers from 1871 that rumor Oscar Dunn's name as a vice presidential candidate for 1872, which is crazy to think now, but this is the historical record. So Oscar Dunn fades into the history books, and a lot of his accomplishments, the school integration, there was a civil rights bill that ultimately got passed, the suffrage that he had fought for, Jim Crow sets in, Reconstruction ends in 1877, and he's kind of lost to history. So we wrote this book to bring him back, and this is a picture of the three of us at Oscar Dunn's tomb in St. Louis Cemetery number 2. And we wanted this book. Brian was stricken by this experience he had as a second grader, so he always wanted to make a book about his ancestor that would appeal to a wide range of readers, but especially that younger people could access. And we did a lot of things. We built a database of images for Barrington so that his 3 years ago. We toured him around and took him to historic sites that still existed, and he had a sketchbook in hand. And yeah, it was a really wonderful visit. And this is kind of the plotting of the graphic novel. You can see my outline here with the sticky notes, and turn that into a script, and we have illustrations, and we had this editing process with the illustrations, so you can kind of see the phases we went through to ensure accuracy. So this is just kind of a little, if you're curious about the illustrator process. And then the book itself delves into, we have maps and we have endnotes, and so if you really want to dive in deeper into the story beyond what's illustrated, you can do that. And the graphic novel is the first graphic novel to tackle any aspect of Reconstruction history. There's a lot of interesting aspects. There's a voodoo moment. There's a very weird newspaper story where Oscar Dunn's minister at St. James was exorcised, and it was in the press, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. It was a crazy time in Louisiana. But what I want to do, I've done a lot of talking. Here's a few scenes. Is for those of you who haven't read the book or aren't familiar with Oscar Dunn's story, I wanted to give you some background. And now maybe if anybody wants to chat or has any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer. I can stop sharing as well unless anybody asks to see something in particular.
Nick, I have one question.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Is any of your information at the Olmsted Center here in New Orleans?
It's a good question. I know that we used some of their resources for some of the research, but most of this research is original to this book.
Okay. And did Lillian Dunn know about this tonight?
Say that again?
Do you know Lillian Dunn?
Brian probably does if it's a relative of his. I don't. I can't say that I do.
Okay, yeah. And she has two other sisters here too that attended our former church. And it was Elise Dunn. And oh man, I can't even think of the other sister's name. But anyway, this is great information. And I want to follow up on this because my grandson and I have been studying the 1800 Civil War and things that happened in that area. And he's off into it, and I've been helping him as much as possible. And this is going to really get him going.
Oh yeah,
So,
I'd love to share. I'd love to, if the Dunns here, anybody who's not familiar with this, I'd love to get them a copy of the book, connect them with Brian. I suspect though that Brian's pretty tapped into his relatives here, but I'd love to keep talking and share whatever I can. I've become very passionate about this work, if you can't tell, so I'm happy to keep that conversation going.
all right, this is great, and you have inspired me to get back in my history.
Thank you.
All right.
What kind of distribution are you going to be able to get for the book? I mean, I haven't seen it other than what you just showed, but it looks wonderful.
Thank you. Well, you can find it in pretty much any local bookstore here. I was just at Octavia not too long ago, and they had it on an end cap. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere where you can buy books. It's we also sell it through our museum shop on Royal Street and online. So it's out there, but we're obviously we're still trying to get the word out, not just about the book, but just about Oscar Dunn's story. I mean, a lot of the consultation we were doing with the street renaming commission was just about getting this story recognized, not the book per se, but we're kind of the advocates for the Oscar Dunn story right now. So but yeah, the book, you can find the book in any number of places, and I'm happy to email you some links if you want as well.
I'm sure I can get it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how many kids I can give it to.
We are too.
Yeah, I'm going to go out on Amazon tonight and see what I can find.
Great. Thank you so much.
It
Jim,
is
I'm
on
sure you
it.
could give away a case at least.
Sorry, what'd you say? Laura, were you saying something?
It is on Amazon. I
Yeah.
just bought it, so it is on
Oh,
Amazon.
well, thank you.
And it's on
multiple-
Octavia too.
Yeah,
This is where I got it.
and I will admit, Nick, it will be the first graphic novel I will have read. I've never.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, it's the first graphic novel I've edited as well. So it was a lot of firsts for many of us, but we just felt like the format was right for telling this story, because it really is just a very, the other aspect of it is that the 1870s, part of the reason I think Reconstruction has been forgotten, there's a lot of reasons. Some of them are not so great. Some of them are pretty dark. But part of it is that the visual record is not, it's not like the civil rights era of, the 1950s and 60s where we have a lot of photographs that we can show from it. So in a way, this is kind of the first civil rights movement, or a civil rights movement. And so we really wanted to make it visual, and to use what we could from the archives to allow people to see what happened, because you can read about it in a history book, but it's different when you can see these major events that took place.
Nick, I'm curious because, it rolls right off my tongue and off Lori's. We call it a graphic novel, but it's not a graphic novel. It's a graphic history, right? I mean, but the phrase is graphic novel. Is there a phrase graphic history?
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's an important distinction, and I've even caught myself slipping. Graphic novel, I would say, is an umbrella term for the whole medium of like these illustrated books. But we use graphic history to distinguish nonfiction, nonfiction books that are illustrated in the kind of graphic novel format.
Mm-hmm.
That is correct. Graphic history is the more correct term.
Yeah, more correct term, right. So, and Nick, when I looked up, didn't I see that you wrote an article about Palmer, of Palmer Park fame?
I did. I've written a few articles. Yeah.
Well, anyway, and there's a movement to rename that park.
Yes, that's part of the street renaming commission as well.
Yes, and I hope it's going to. Yeah, I hope it's going to be renamed. I mean, because I read your piece about it, and I've read other things about it also. I mean, Mr. Palmer was a minister who advocated, for slavery. I mean, gave theological justification for slavery. I mean, it's an atrocity to have that park named after him.
I agree with you. He actually comes up briefly. In fact, I kind of shoehorned Palmer into this book because I felt like his Thanksgiving Day sermon from 1861 it just kind of encapsulated so much of the attitude of the moment. And it was a very important sermon because it was printed and disseminated throughout the southern states. He was very, very popular. He was this firebrand preacher. And so this sermon that he gave, that, like you said, gave this theological defense of slavery, became this moral calling card throughout what became the Confederacy. He gave the sermon in November on Thanksgiving, and within a few months, these states started seceding. And there's been some academic work that has been done that talks about how significant, that particular sermon was.
Mm-hmm.
I also find it kind of poignant, maybe timely, ironic that our state legislature is meeting right now, and we're still fighting that fight.
Yeah, there's a bill that was tabled today or yesterday that a representative from Slidell, who happens to be the chair of the Education Committee, was trying to basically censor the teaching of racial history, women's history. This just really kind of wacky bill that was a lot of history folks fought back against it, and he tabled his own bill for the time being. But there is a lot of stuff happening right now where this very kind of history, people are pushing back against being taught in schools, which is a shame.
I think it was a different legislator that said that we need to teach the good side of slavery.
No, it was the same guy.
What?
It's the same guy. Same guy. I forget his name now, but yeah, he's from Slidell. It's the same guy.
Everything old is new again.
Yeah.
So in that respect, the very things that we're talking about are as contemporary as today.
Oh, 100%. I mean, this book was kind of born in some sense from the origins of the monuments controversy here in New Orleans. As a matter of fact, that was how Brian and I first connected. Was we did a podcast that aired nationally on NPR that talked about. This was an aspect of the story I forgot to mention, which was that I talked about how beloved Dunn was and this outpouring of grief. Well, the state legislature actually passed an act and appropriated $10,000 in 1873 to build a monument to Oscar Dunn. In 1873, this predated Liberty Place, obviously, because that hadn't even happened yet. It predated the Beauregard statue, the Lee statue, and it didn't happen. We don't know exactly what happened, but we do know that the Republicans, who were the radical party at the time, lost power, and probably with that, the incentive to build this monument to Dunn. But so when this stuff pulled up in 2017 with the removal of the monuments, we did a podcast talking about the monument to the Black governor that never was built, and that kind of got this story a lot of attention because it is, like you said, it's still very relevant today. How we remember history, how we memorialize history, how we teach history, it's as relevant as ever.
And how did you personally get interested in this all, Nick?
That's just kind of my thing, is I just go down these rabbit holes. And as in my job as an editor at a history museum, I've kind of just been steeping myself for years in Louisiana history, and my interest is in stories that haven't been told, not the stories that have been told many times over with different lenses, but really stuff that adds to the dialogue that for one reason or the other has been forgotten. And so I really feel fortunate that I found the Oscar Dunn story, and I found the research that Brian Mitchell had already started, and it was just kind of a perfect there's serendipity, really. So yeah.
Wow. It's a wonderful thing. Wow. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
So were you always interested in history, Nick? Were you a history major in school, or this was a hobby?
No, actually, my background is in journalism. I went to journalism school, and I, for a number of years, worked in magazine journalism. That took me from Chicago to the East Coast, and eventually to New Orleans. I was a freelance writer for a few years before I started working at the History Museum. So my background has always been in storytelling, and I was always into like feature stories, the big 10, 12 page things in the magazine. I don't even know if they make those anymore. I haven't written one in a few years, but I've always been interested in digging deep into a topic and doing research. So that kind of ultimately translated well to working at the museum.
Gotcha. But it makes sense that you have a journalistic background, because you're telling stories.
Yes.
And the big stories, they don't do it anymore because the younger people have the attention span of a gnat, and they want it in the simplest terms that you can't keep their attention. They want it fed to them as small as possible. They don't really want to read. I know I'm being broad general on that, but
I would argue that it's that has become not just a generational thing, but I think of all ages. I think social media and the computers in your hand that we talked about earlier, the ease with which we can become distracted and have our attention diverted. I think it's become more challenging for all of us. I mean, even myself, and my background is in this stuff, to keep my focus on one deep thing for an extended period of time. It's harder and harder. So it's a challenge for me in my job to find creative ways to hold people's attention for things that really require time and thought, and that you can't just pick up in a soundbite. I don't think I could have done this presentation in 30 seconds.
No.
Mm-mm.
No.
No.
But and it is in sound bites, and it is, and the other thing too, I'm realizing as I've gotten older, how much I depend on Google to be my external brain, that I don't have to remember information. Oh, I can just Google that. You know what I mean? So I'm not requiring my brain to work to retrieve the information. Unlike in our younger years with the Encyclopedia Britannica that we'd have to go look up the information. But yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
I do have one tangential question. I don't mean to be boring people here, but I am curious that, you associate Oscar Dunn with Ulysses S. Grant, because, I'm not a historian, but my one recollection of Ulysses S. Grant as a president was he was one of the most corrupt presidents that we've ever had. Am I correct?
Well, that's a really good tangent. And I think that his record is beginning to be re-examined by some pretty prominent historians, because while it's true, and for many of the same reasons that somebody like Oscar Dunn was treated so poorly by early historians, is that Grant represented radical Reconstruction. And he really, to his credit, forced the issue on suffrage and civil rights and the Reconstruction amendments that changed American society. And Grant is an interesting character. He was an interesting character. He had a lot of personal problems, but his administration, at least in the research that I've done, is as it went on, there was issues with patronage and helping his buddies out, and putting people into positions where they could profit. And but I will tell you, having examined some of the oldest history books assessing the Grant presidency and the Reconstruction era at large, is they had a slant, and those were entrenched for generations in our understanding of his presidency and that time period in American history. And there are a lot of scholars, not just in recent years. There was a great, very long biography of Grant that came out a few years ago that I would recommend for anybody interested, that are really starting to reassess and look at what he meant as a civil rights president, and as somebody who really forced change on a country that was not willing to seemingly want to do it on its own.
Thank you.
And you're right. That's as far as the history I got. That he was in favor of abolishing the slavery, and he was instrumental in doing that. And that's what me and my grandson are working on. This is great. Now,
Ron
do you
Chernow,
have?
that's the author.
Ron Chernow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jim.
Now, is this session being recorded?
Yes, it is, because there were some people who couldn't be with us tonight and asked if we were going to record it. So Melissa set it up to record. So yeah, we're going to make it available to some folks who asked.
Okay. What I'd like to do is have a copy of this at the Homicide Center.
Well, we'll see about that. If we can make that happen, we will. Yeah, good idea.
Great.
With Nick's
Because,
permission.
There's a lot of history on there, and I was involved in moving a lot of history from the old Central Church that had a lot of history about the Dunns, and I'd like to put it all in one big box.
Yeah, there you go.
And this would be the cream of the crop.
I also wrote it just on the Grant thing too. Another article I wrote recently was about Dunn's relationship with Grant. So maybe I can send that to Lori, and anybody who's interested can check that out if you want to just read a little bit more on that specific segment of our conversation. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
great.
Okay, any more questions?
Well, he woke up my brain.
Yeah. Well, we want to say a big thank you to you, Nick. This has been fascinating, and it's inspired me. and I think inspired all of us. So.
And I think you've broken, you brought a different way of looking at history with the
Mhm.
graphic novel. I think it's just fantastic.
Well,
And I want to
thank
say
you so
something.
much. Yeah.
I think it's great, that you've taken the time to do this research and write this book. There's so many stories that are untold, hidden in history, that
Mhm.
people don't know about. And I really appreciate your efforts. I just wanted to say thanks.
Well, thank you so much. Well, there's definitely a collaborative effort. The three of us plus a few other very important people. We couldn't have made this book, any of us individually. So we're just happy we're sharing Oscar Dunn's story with the world. And I appreciate y'all giving me time to talk tonight. I hope I wasn't too boring, but I really do appreciate it. And I like talking about this stuff.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you so much for doing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you shared the story in a way that was graspable, even though you think you talked, you gave us knowledge. So thank you for giving us knowledge, which I didn't have before. So
Good.
Yeah, absolutely.
that.
Great.
Now
I
I
did
got
look him up on Wikipedia this afternoon.
The Wikipedia page needs some updating. I'll just say that. I don't know who does that, but it needs some updating. I think I'm actually quoted in Oscar Dunn's Wikipedia from another thing, but they haven't refreshed it since this book came out.
Can't you go in and edit it? Can't anybody go in and edit it?
In theory, yes.
In theory?
Yes, I believe you could. There's yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You could.
I wouldn't know. I just believe everything Wikipedia says and just move on.
I give permission to anybody here to
Yeah.
edit the Oscar Dunn Wikipedia. You are more than welcome.
Okay.
Great.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thanks so much for being here tonight, everybody. And a special thank you to you, Nick. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Absolutely.
Good to see you all.
Yeah. So I'll pronounce God's blessing and we'll move on. Are we ready to go?
We're ready to go.
All right. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
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 Good night,
Thanks so much.
everybody.
Hey, everybody.
God bless.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.